I would like to extend my appreciation for the opportunity given to me to convey public lecture that is about the issue that is very important nowadays, that is the reconciliation of Wasathiyyah Islam or moderate Islam, promoting middle way Islam and socio-economic equality. The commitment of Wasathiyyah Islam Indonesia in recent years is a reaffirmation. I would like to reiterate, this is the reaffirmation, so to give back or to return of the implementation of moderate Islam, the belief and the main character of Indonesian Muslims. Because from the very beginning, Muslims in Indonesia adheres to the principle of moderate Islam, and this is very important as a response towards the consolidation and strengthening of extremism, be it right-wing or left-wing, for the last few years. So there has been a tendency of extremism, either it right-wing or left-wing. As a country with the largest Muslim population, adhering to principles of democracy and having a heterogeneous demographic anatomy, relations between Islam and the state in Indonesia have unique dynamics. Indonesia does not adhere to theocracy, which is based on one particular religion, nor it is a secular state, which separate states from religion. Indonesia has a distinctive consensus in managing the relation between religions and the state, which principles are contained in Pancasila and the Constitution, which is the basic Constitution of 1945. Wasathiyyah Islam is a model of Islamic expression and understanding that is relevant in the framework of state of Indonesia. Such a model of relations has become a long debate since before the proclamation of independence in 1945 in various forums, and continued to go through the process of maturation through various phases and important struggles of Indonesia's independence history. It was colored by several uprisings, community protest movements, tough debates in the Constituent Assembly, which then was stopped by the presidential decree, until it became increasingly firm as a national consensus after the amendment to the 1945 Basic Constitution in the early years of reform. The principles of Islamic moderation is not a new reality in Indonesia. Mainstream of Indonesian Muslims in most of the history have embraced moderate Islam. Lately, it is important to be confirmed, given that extremism in the name of Islam continue to exacerbate. The National Conference of the Indonesian Council of Ulama in 2015 stated that Islam Wasathiyyah as a paradigm of devotion, and stated in Taujihat Surabaya or Surabaya Guiding Rules. This is the spirit of the Indonesian Ulama Council at all levels, the guidelines of administrators of all levels in formulating policies. A year before the national conference in 2015, ISIS was declared in Syria during the month of Ramadan 2014. and campaign about states with Islamic leader by the mean of war. Many nation-state systems that are not based on Islamic leader or non-Khilafah is labeled as evil or tawhid or related to paganism and can be fought. ISIS influences also strengthened in Indonesia, followed by various terrorist acts supporting them. Before ISIS, the ideology of Khilafah, which opposed the idea of democracy and nation-state, had already emerged. There is a non-violent model, as what is proposed by Hizb ut-Tahrir. Some sometimes take the path of terror, such as being driven by Jama'ah Islamiyah or GI, a transnational organization which has the structure of administrators in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, and Australia, which are the main actors of pre-ISIS in the region since the beginning of 2000. And we also see that the latest movement is GAT, Jama'ah Ansar Tauhid, and it also conducted terror everywhere. At the beginning of Indonesia's independence, there was also the movement of DITII, or Darul Islam, Indonesian Islamic Army, and its metamorphosis in the middle of New Ord era, and it was transformed to NII, or Indonesian Islamic State, which both opposed nation-state and wanted religion-based state. All these movements are in the name of demands for maximum accommodation for Islamic political aspirations. And they always depart from the assumption that Muslims are marginalized, are discriminated by the regime that they perceive as anti-Islam in a country with majority of Muslim population. The movement was not only triggered by domestic national dynamics, but also often stimulated and provoked by the global dynamics, be it in the name of fellow Muslims' solidarity or Ukhuwah Islamiyah, who are tyrannized, as well as in the name of faith protection in response to extremities from the opposite pole in the form of religious liberalism, which is considered to threaten the purity of faith. There is a mutual casual interaction between the extreme right and extreme left. Their perception is not entirely correct. The politics of Islam in Indonesia continues to carry out a greater accommodation towards the political aspiration of Islam in various policies, legislations, regulations, and state facilitation. Various related public service are facilitated, such as through a model of religious-related disputes solved through judiciary or arbitration process, Hajj services, zakat endowments, Islamic banking, non-bank financial institutions based on Islam, halal products guarantee. Regulatory and institutional frameworks are also put in place. The greatest implementation of the Sharia law was carried out in Aceh specifically, which applied Islamic Sharia as a whole. However, all the dynamics are not seen comprehensively and are neglected. The view that Indonesian government is anti-Islam, tawhid, or evil remains echoed throughout the reform era, utilizing a climate of freedom of expression and ease of information due to technological advances. The peak of extremity was increasingly critical in 2014 when ISIS was established in Syria with strong and unexpected effects in Indonesia. Therefore, some Islamic organizations consolidated various movements of moderation of Islam that is compatible or in line with democracy and nation state. With various accentuation, before Islamic Ulama Council declared Islam Wasathiyyah that uphold anti-extremity, two Islamic organization, biggest Islamic organization, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, also had similar consolidation in their conference that happens almost simultaneously. The conference of Nahdlatul Ulama in 2015 promote Islam Nusantara that emphasize on local wisdom and local innovation as a response of various transnational movements that is not adhere to the principle of locality. The National Conference of Muhammadiyah in 2015 also initiated the idea of Islam, advanced Islam, that puts the emphasis and concern on competitiveness and also productivity of Islamic community and not only about the national consensus. The National Conference of Islamic Ulama Council, NU, and Muhammadiyah also took place almost at similar time in August 2014, the month of independence of Indonesia. And the meeting points is not to disturb the national consensus. It adheres to Pancasila, the basic constitution of 1945, and also the unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia, and also Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. And few months before, in February 2018, there has been a consolidation in the Indonesia Islamic Congress in Yogyakarta, and attended by various Islamic organizations, universities, Islamic boarding schools, and it has established Risalah Yogyakarta. And one of the principles is said that the peak of the struggle and the intention of Islam in Indonesia is national consensus, which are Pancasila, Basic Constitution of 1945, the Unitary State Republic of Indonesia, and Bhinneka Tunggal Ika. These are the intention and the dream of Islamic community in Indonesia. And this national consensus is always conveyed in every speech and scientific consensus. And I call this as mistaq. This is a term used in Al-Quran. This is basically means consensus. To picture the consensus between Islamic community and non-Islamic community, Indonesia is Darul Mithaq, or area of consensus, or home of consensus. The Islamic community is adhered to the commitment to maintain this consensus with all the elements of the nations, to maintain the pluralism that is also exemplified through Medina Charter by the Holy Prophet of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's called Mithaq Medina, or Medina Consensus. In Surabaya Guiding Principle, as a result of National Conference in 2015, it is reiterated that for Islamic community in Indonesia or Islamic Ummah, the Pancasila, Basic Constitution of 1945, the Unitary State Republic of Indonesia, and Unity in Diversity are the guiding principles of Indonesia. And the ulama and Islamic religious leader are the main important actors in formulating and also legitimation of Pancasila, Basic Constitution of 1945, Unitary State Republic of Indonesia. To date, the Islamic community are faced to two major phenomena. The first is the strengthening of consolidation between text-based groups that is exclusive, intolerant, rigid, judging that someone is Gentile and hostile, and even to conduct violation with the same Muslim brothers with different thoughts or principles. And the second is consolidation of the group that is tend to be permissive and liberal. And this has shifted to become left extreme pole or right extreme pole. The left pole created liberalism and pluralism and secularism in conducting religious freedom, and the right wing emerges radicalism and fanatism in conducting the religious principles. Surabaya Guiding Principles also state that the dynamics of these two movements has the relation with transnational movements that developed the influence in Indonesia by utilizing the momentum of freedom of expression and also technology advancement in communication. As the answer of two main movements, the National Conference in 2015 has a view that we have to promote Islam Wasatiyyah in the life of the community and also the state. Islam Wasatiyyah means as Islam Rahmatan lil Alamin, or blessings for the universe. Islam Wasatiyyah is middle way Islam to realize Khairu Ummah, or the best Ummah. The understanding and also practice of Islam Wasatiyyah has the following characteristics. First of all, tawasud, or taking the middle way, namely the understanding that is not redundant, ifrat, or not redundant, and not tafrith or reductive, or to minimize the meaning of the principles. The second is tawazun, or balance in all aspects of life, either in the world or hereafter, and firm in saying the principles, and also can distinguish between which ones are distortion and which ones are differences. Inhiraf means that we have to make it straight, and itiraf means that we have to tolerate, because we have to tolerate differences. Tidal means straight and firm, to put one in a proportion, and also to balance, implement the rights and also the obligation. Tasamu, or tolerance, to uphold differences and to respect differences. The principles or the values of Islam is basically the theology of tolerance, because the principles taught in Quran is lakum dinukum waliyadin. Your religion is your religion and my religion is my religion, meaning that we have to be friends with each other and we have to respect to each other. And in Islam, the ulama also implements, say that my school of thoughts is my school of thoughts, and your school of thoughts is your school of thoughts. And this is basically what is implemented in Indonesia, because we have so many parties that is based on religion. So we obey the principle that even though we have different parties, but we are still brothers and sisters. Next, musawa, or egalitarian, meaning that we are not going to be discriminate even though we have differences. So there is no discriminative actions, no matter we have different ethnics or we have different religions. The next is shura, or consensus, to solve the problem through deliberation, and all the problems will be based on consensus, based on mutual benefits or mutual goodness. Islah, or reform, to put forward reform principles to achieve better results. That is why we also have one principle, is to conduct sustainable improvement or development. And the words or the terms used by ulama is al-islah, to conduct a continuous improvement and reconciliation towards betterment continuously. These are the principles implemented. The next is awlawiyah, to put forward the priority, the ability to identify which ones should be prioritized to be implemented. Tatawur wa ibtikar means dynamic and innovative, open to changes based on the development of the era, because we see that there are some radical values of Islam that Islam cannot be changed. This is what we call as sabitation, opposing changes groups, so that it cannot be implemented in all the regions that are not in Arabic. It's very difficult for us to implement. Next is tahadur, or civilize, to uphold akhlaqul karima, or good moral character, identity, and integrity as Khairul Ummah, the best Islamic community in humanity and civilization. Islam Wasathiyyah supports the idea of collective efforts, all Muslim community of Indonesia and all elements of the nation, in strengthening the unity of Indonesia in the framework of unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia based on Pancasila. Islam Wasathiyyah is a paradigm of the Islamic Ulama Council, is expected to return the Islamic movement in Indonesia as what was established by our previous ulama when they built Indonesia as an independent nation. The middle way Islam, the balanced Islam, the firm and straight, tolerance, egalitarian, to put forward the liberation, reform, and to put forward priority, or awlawiyah, dynamic and innovative, as well as civilized, or tahadur. The Indonesian Ulama Council at all levels should understand this paradigm of Islam Wasathiyyah so that they can speak up to the Islamic community, and all the boards and committees of Islamic Ulama Council should preach Islam Wasathiyyah to as many community of Islam as possible. In a more systematic way, Indonesian Ulama Council also prepared the cadre of ulama in Indonesia to be the frontliner of the preach of Islamic Wasathiyyah, so that the understanding of Islam as what was put by the previous ulama can be reaffirmed to be the identity of Indonesian Muslim. The National Conference in 2014 also stated to the Islamic community, to the world, to implement Islam Wasathiyyah as the form of love to the peaceful world, full of justice, and also civilized world. the promotion of Islam Wasatiyyah requires support and collaboration of international world. Mainstreaming Islam Wasatiyyah is one of the efforts to maintain the unitary state of the Republic of Indonesia as the result of consensus. I call it as Darul Mitsak, home of consensus. Some also say it that as Darul Sulu, or home of peace. Some state it as Darul Ahdi, or home of promises, but I prefer to call it Darul Mitsak because it was built based on the consensus of all the elements of the nation. In Quran, there is a first saying that wain kana bayakum fadiyatun musalamatun ila ahlihi. If between you and the non-Muslim community there is a consensus to live in harmony and peacefully, if somebody gets killed because of your conduct, it means that you have to be responsible. You have to pay for the fine for the family. This is what is stated in Quran in order to maintain the harmony and in order to maintain the consensus. The basis of the nation in Indonesia is Pancasila, and Pancasila for the nation-based groups is basically the religious nation principles, and for Islamic groups, Pancasila is the principle that lead to belief to one supreme God. The nation-based groups and Islamic-based groups can meet in Pancasila. Therefore, Pancasila is basically the meeting point, or kalimatun sawah in Arabic. This is the meeting point among all the elements of the nation. The government system based on the basic constitution of 1945, that basically based on Jakarta Charter with some words deleted, and then these 7 words are omitted from Pancasila so that it can be accepted by all parties in Indonesia. And Islamic community was voluntarily agree to omit these 7 words so that it can reach the consensus in the nation. And this inspires all the verses in the basic constitution of 1945. And basically these are the form of consensus. These 2 pillars, Pancasila and the basic constitution of 1945, are the basic principles of Indonesia. So that we can maintain Indonesia as a state unitary nation, then we have to maintain the combination between Ukhuwah Islamiyah, or Islamic Brotherhood, and also Ukhuwah Wathaniyah. So apart from the aforementioned 2 pillars, Pancasila and Basic Constitution of 1945, it is also strengthened by the paradigm that we built, namely Ukhuwah Islamiyah, or brotherhood among Muslims, and also Ukhuwah Wathaniyah, or brotherhood among nations. These principles continue to be echoed so that everybody has the same principle. There should not be any radicalism, moreover terrorism. We also developed the 3rd paradigm, namely Ukhuwah Insaniyah. So brotherhood among all the humankind, so that we can love each other, we can care for each other, no matter we have different races, different religions, different nations. As humankind, to build mawaddah warahmah, to love each other, to care for one another, and also to build the principles of helping each other. These are the principles that we build. And if we can maintain this principle, inshallah, by the grace of God, we can reach a peaceful world. Second, the security and also peaceful situation should be implemented. War should be prevented. And in the Islamic concept, we have 5 principles that are protection towards religion, protection towards soul, protections towards mind, protection towards generation, and also a protection towards the wealth. These principles are called Daruriyah Kamsa. These are the basic needs in order to maintain the well-being. But for me, these 5 principles are not sufficient, because we also have to add security and also peaceful or peace, so that we can achieve these 5 principles. We can see in many countries, for example, in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is basically a rich country, and also it has the potential or resource of oil and gold, but because it's not safe or it's not secure, it becomes one of the poorest country in the world. So that on top of these 5 principles, we have to add 2 principles, namely Hifdul Amni, or protection towards security, and Hifdul Wasalam, peace or peaceful situation. I often call them not only 5 principles, but Daruriyatus Sab, that is 7 principles of basic needs to maintain the well-being of the people and the nation. I sometimes give the analogy that peace will be achieved if there is understanding to each other. Husnul Tafahum means that even though somebody is wrong, we can actually tolerate and we can respect to each other. In Indonesia, sometimes there are things that we try to sway. So it's basically the same as marriage. If we base on tolerance, but if you don't base it on tolerance, then our life will not be peaceful. I have a story about a person who lives with tolerance or understanding to each other. They never fight for 50 years, living in a marriage life, until one time the wife wants to argue. The wife wants to feel how it feels to have arguments or conflicts. So he actually made the husband a shirt with different sleeves, so that when the husband wears it, the husband will be mad. But when the husband wears the shirt, the husband say, "My wife is very smart, because I am a writer, so the right sleeve is basically smaller, so I will not have difficulties in writing, and I don't need to use pen. I can use my left hand to make it as a pen so that I can write." Meaning that even though conflict is made or conflict is deliberately made, But if you have the principles of understanding each other or tolerance each other, conflict will not happen. This is how we maintain peace and harmony and security. Islam in Indonesia is basically similar to Islam in Middle East, the origin of Islam. The source and the teachings are the same. But Islam in Indonesia has an added value. Islam in Indonesia is ka'afah mal mitsak. Islam with consensus. Because in Saudi Arabia, there is no mitsak. In Indonesia, we have consensus. Therefore, Indonesians should be able to accept this kind of Islam. And the mitsak are Pancasila and also Basic Constitution of 1945. Therefore, when I was asked about Khilafah, or nation based on religious leader, whether it is Islam or not, for me, in my opinion, it's also Islam, because in the past there were Khilafah, but kingdom also Khilafah, like Saudi Kingdom, Jordan Kingdom. Emir-based state is also Islam, like in Kuwait, Qatar. And republics is basically also has Islamic values, like in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in Egypt, in Turkey. If Khilafah is basically Islam, why it is rejected in Indonesia? And I said it's not rejected, but it is automatically disapproved because it violates the consensus. It does not adhere to the principle of consensus. I call it as mukhalafah atul mitsak. What are not based on consensus is automatically declined. So we don't have to argue further, because if we take the measurement of consensus, then it will be automatically declined. I believe this is the principle that we built in Indonesia. This system, because in Indonesia there has been consensus of the form of the nation, which is unitary state led by a president and not by Khalifa. So it is very evident that the form of the country of Indonesia is like that. And this system is open and to absorb Sharia elements through the process of legislation based on consensus. And there has been some rules and regulation based on Islam that is legalized and that becomes national system. Distinguished participants of the forum, the State Unitary of Republic of Indonesia is maintained by the commitment of consensus, and in the framework of Islam Wasathiyyah should also be strengthened by equality in economy based on the fifth principle of Pancasila, the social justice for the people of Indonesia. The economic gap should be reduced through the economic equality. And therefore, I often say that the national economic development should reduce disparity and gaps between poor and rich, as well as the gap between one region to another, because Indonesia is a very big country, therefore with many population, and disparity still emerges, and therefore our efforts is how to strengthen the weak and not to weaken the strong through collaboration, and how we can support each other between the strong and the weak, and not to clash between the poor and the weak, and the poor and the strong, and also to strengthen and to give maximized utility towards the potential that we have, be it natural resources or human resources. We hope that Indonesia's human resources will be transformed into human capital, as what we can see in Singapore. We want to take the example of Singapore on how Singapore can transform human resource to become human capital through lean and match educational system, through vocational schools education and various activities. And therefore, we hope that Indonesia in the future, I call it as a new stream of Indonesia's economy, to lead Indonesia into better condition and into a more prosperous nation. I believe that is all that I can convey in my public lecture. However, this new stream of economy is not a new policy, but to continue what was put forward by our current President Joko Widodo 4 years ago in 2014, what was put by President Jokowi as a milestone. If we can maximize it, and we can maximize the milestone, inshallah, by the grace of God, the economy of Indonesia will be better. I believe in optimistic economy, not pessimistic economy. If I remain pessimistic that Indonesia will be destroyed, but I don't want to have that belief. I believe that Indonesia will be better through collaboration of all elements of the nations. I believe that's all. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sejahtera.
May peace and prosperity be upon us all.